Evgeny Morozov, now everybody talks about big data today, and I'm wondering what triggered your fascination in this issue?
Well, part of this fascination is my interest in issues of surveillance and the way in which all of the information that is produced about individuals can now be tracked and used for all sorts of purposes. So that was one of the reasons. Another reason is investigation of the kind of politics that are built into policy that is based on big data. I mean, a lot of this is based on numbers, a lot of it is based on numerical data, and of course, you cannot always capture the complexity of the policy situation through numbers alone. So the kind of reductionist assumptions that are very often built into data sets and into information that is gathered only through sensors, only through tracking devices is of big concern to me, because I think it results also in a very different kind of politics, very different from the one that we had before.
So how do you think is this influence of big data on society and on politics? How does this influence the future of our politics, political processes?
Well, I think on the one hand, clearly, big data allows you to spot relationships between different variables. You might be able to understand that, certain processes that are happening in the economy or in the environment or in any other domain are connected to other processes. Right? You might not be able to explain why they connect to each other, so you'll be able to detect a correlation, right? But you would not necessarily be able to investigate the causation. And of course, detecting a correlation, knowing that one variable affects another variable, might allow you to tinker with the variables, right? But as long as you don't understand the causal mechanism and the causal process behind some of those events, it also means that the politics also becomes something different, right? It's no longer about going and preventing players that we hold to be responsible for crime or corruption or any of the other social processes. We are no longer interested in doing something that does not revolve around feedback, right? And we are moving to a very different process. We're just trying to tinker with the variables without fully understanding who it is that's producing some of that information, right? And I think that's a very fundamental shift. And this movement away from causality and investigation of why things happen to a model where we just don't even care about why, but we know how to change the variables. It's a very different type of politics that I think, in some domains will be very useful, where it doesn't matter who is responsible for what. But in some domains, I think it will be far more problematic, because it will allow us to, basically reassign or even actually avoid assigning blame to the parties who deserve it.
Now, where do you see the role of think tanks in politicizing such issues?
Well, I think think tanks, by their definition, mostly limit themselves to a couple of particular outputs, which are publishing papers and organizing events. So the only thing I think that think tanks can do is to publish more papers and organize more events. I mean, the way in which think tank would choose to talk about these issues, from what perspective, how you would want to link an issue like big data to existing critiques of the policy process. There are, for example, lots of critiques of behavioral economics and nudging that are now beginning to pop up. And it would be interesting, for example, to organize an event or to have a paper that would look at what are some of the intellectual and the ideological affinities between the recent fascination with big data in the policy circles with the fascination with behavioral economics and nudging. Because part of it, part of the nudging agenda is that you want to build nudges that are highly effective. And what's the best way to build nudges that are highly effective? Well, it's to gather as much data as you can about individuals who will be nudged, right? And of course, how do you do that? You do it through a smartphone by tracking everything that individuals do and then presenting them with the nudge on their phone, right? But to make those connections, I think it's not enough just to sort of separate these issues, whether it's big data or the quantified self or gamification, all of this, buzzwords that Silicon Valley keeps throwing at us. We should not treat them in isolation. I think we have to be able to link them to the broader political processes. And I think think tanks that have dealt with these issues in the past, that have addressed various political issues and that have looked at some of the ideological underpinning of policy issues, are perfectly placed to link some of those buzzwords to the broader ideological agendas. And I think this is where the think tanks can play a strong role.
Thank you very much for your insights.
My pleasure.